Hello, Berean Christian Church, and welcome to Berean Online. My name is Jason, and I'm super excited today because we're going to be starting a new sermon series called A Port in the Storm, Your Battle Plan Against Anxiety. And you might be thinking right now, Jason, why are we talking about anxiety? Why are we discussing this issue? And frankly, because it's relevant. I mean, think about it. Anxiety was a buzzword before any of these current events started happening. But now that we're looking forward to reopening the economy, we don't know what that's going to look like. We're stepping through this 5-phase plan here in Illinois. And if you're outside of Illinois, maybe your own state's plan looks a little bit different. We have a lot of questions about the future. Could we see a spike in cases? What's going to happen to the economy? Is there a recession coming, or is everything going to be okay? Am I going to lose my savings? What happens to my IRA or my 401k? Or what happens to my other investments? What happens to my job? Will I keep my job? Will I be furloughed? Could I even be fired or take a pay cut? On top of all that, many of you have health concerns either for yourself or for your loved ones. I know that I do. It puts us in a pretty worry-inducing situation. For some of you, it's a new thing. You haven't experienced anxiety before. For some of you, anxiety is like an old friend. But regardless of your situation, regardless of the level of anxiety that you may feel now or be feeling in the near future, I want you to know that God has the answer. In order to kind of push that idea, in order to convince you of that idea that God has the answer for your anxiety, I want to tell you a story. And this story actually starts quite a while ago, about 2,000 years ago, actually. This story begins in a Palestinian town, or just outside, with a man that was a leper. We hear the word leper and we go, all right, I don't really know, like his fingers are falling off, like is it like a big rash? What does that look like? And that's because when we think of lepers, we normally think of a disease called Hansen's disease. I know that's really boring, but when the ancients talked about leprosy, they actually meant any one of 75 different diseases, some of which were deadly, some of which weren't, and all of them were incurable, at least at the time they were. And that means that lepers, regardless of what disease they had, well, they fell into three pretty, specific categories. It didn't have much to do with their disease. It had a lot more to do with their social situation. Lepers were, first of all, outcasts. Second of all, they thought they deserved their disease, at least if they were Jewish, they did. And third of all, they were hopeless. Let me explain that to you a little bit. First of all, they were outcasts. What I mean when I say that lepers were outcasts is that when you contracted leprosy, when you began showing symptoms, regardless of which one of these 75 diseases we're talking about, when that was identified, a priest would come to you and would declare you to be unclean if you were a Jew. And if you were unclean, it meant you were unfit to be amongst God's people. There were some forms of uncleanliness that you wait a week or two, you do a purification ritual, and you're good. But if you're a leper, it didn't work out that well. You'd actually be sent outside the city, sent away from your family. Many rabbis taught that your spouse could divorce you as soon as they realized that you were a leper. You were isolated. You were outcast. Second of all, lepers thought they deserved their disease. And here's what I mean by that. I mentioned a moment ago that lepers, they were unclean, right? They were not pure. They were not fit to be amongst God's people, or at least that was the perception. The idea was that leprosy was a disease that wasn't spread by germs, it wasn't spread by animals, it wasn't spread by parasites or anything that we normally associate with disease. The idea was if you were a leper, if you had one of these skin diseases that was classified as leprosy, that you had done something to anger God, and that God was punishing you. And if God was punishing you, then nobody else wanted anything to do with you. You deserved it. You had done something horrible. You had murdered someone, or you had stolen, or you had committed adultery. That was the idea. And the fact of the matter is, most lepers had not done anything wrong. They just caught a disease. It wasn't really their fault. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the perception in Palestine in this period was that if you were a leper, you had done something to anger God, and you deserved it. So lepers were outcasts, and they thought they deserved their disease. And third of all, lepers were hopeless. I said a moment ago, the leprosy was not necessarily deadly because it could be any one of these 75 diseases, anything from actual leprosy, from Hansen's disease, all the way to ringworm or severe eczema. It could be something that's really not that serious, but almost every single one of these diseases was incurable in that period, which meant even if it never killed you, you were doomed to live outside of the city, to be left by your spouse, to be forsaken by your children, to be forgotten by your friends. These lepers, even if the disease didn't take their lives, were hopeless. What's the point of living if you have to live all alone? And I tell you all these things to emphasize a pretty important point, which is that lepers, well, they had a lot of reason to be anxious. And when I say anxiety, a lot of us think of worry, and that is a part of anxiety. But anxiety is more than just worry. It's a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of panic. Even though nothing's here to hurt you, you just feel like there's a bear in the closet or something. You have this panicked feeling, and you just don't know why. It causes insomnia. It's a chronic condition that can last for days or weeks or months or years or even a lifetime. And I say this, I explain this, you understand. That this leper that was an outcast, that thought he deserved his disease, that felt entirely helpless, well, this leper would have felt panic, and he would have been probably an insomniac. It would have been a chronic condition. He would have felt hopeless. This leper would have felt anxiety. We pick up on this leper's story in Luke chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. There's a little more to this story, but this is the part that we'll read today. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 12. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came to him who was covered with leprosy. He didn't just have leprosy, he was covered in it. And when he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Not you can heal me, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man and said, "I am willing. Be clean." And immediately, not 15 minutes later, not 30 minutes later, not a month later, immediately the leprosy left him. And we read those short couple of verses and we say, okay, I get it. Jesus can heal diseases, moving on. What does this have to do with anxiety? And to start answering that question, I want to explain what we just read. You see, what we just read was indeed a story, but it was a specific kind of story, a specific genre of story that was pretty popular amongst the Greeks and Jews, which is called a quest for healing. I know it was a really creative title, but apparently they had better things to do than come up with catchy titles for their books. This rhetorical device, this literary device is called a quest for healing, and it has 4 very specific parts. The first one is that the disease is described. The second is that a request for healing is made. Third is that the process of healing is described. And fourth is that the healing is attested to by witnesses. So what does that look like in the leper's case? Let's look at the leper's quest for healing. First of all, the disease is described. A man comes along who is covered with leprosy. This is a severe case. We don't know if it's Hansen's disease, if it's ringworm, if it's something else, but whatever it is a severe case, and he is covered in it. Second of all, a request is made. The text says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." He makes a request. Third, the healing is described. Jesus reaches out his hand, touches the man, and says, "I am willing. Be clean," and immediately the leprosy left him. And lastly, the healing is attested to by witnesses. We didn't actually read that section, but if you read on just a couple verses, the man is sent to the priests to be inspected. This is a quest for healing. But the leper is healed of more than just his physical disease. Remember how I said he was an outcast? He thought he deserved this, that leprosy was a punishment for some sin that he had done because he'd been taught that from a young age, that he was probably hopeless. He had no hope for a cure. Well, that quest for healing applies to each one of those categories as well. In this story, after seeing this isolated leper, we also see healing from isolation. First step, the disease is described. This man is outside the city, all alone. There's no one with him. When Jesus and his disciples approach, this man approaches Jesus and there is no one else with him. This man is alone. If he was really lucky, maybe he came from a leper colony. Maybe he has some friends here that aren't mentioned. In fact, in other accounts in other Gospels, we see similar stories with more than one leper. So maybe he had one or two friends. But the way that Luke tells it, this man was all alone. So the disease is described. Second, the request is made. He says, "You can make me clean." Remember how he said if someone was unclean, they had to leave the city, that they couldn't be with their friends, they had to back off and get outside the city wall? When he says, "You can make me clean," Jesus, he's telling Jesus, I know you can restore me so I can go home, so I can see my wife, so I can see my kids, so I can be with my friends and family. You can make me clean. So a request is made. Jesus, help me go home. Help me no longer be isolated. Then healing is described. Jesus touches the man. Think about that. We don't know how long this guy was sick. It could have been a month. It could have been 4 months. It could have been a year. It could have been a decade. We don't know how long this man was sick, but I can guarantee you something. From the moment that he began to show symptoms, nobody touched him. People wouldn't be within feet of him. In fact, if you were walking down the road and a leper was nearby and they saw you approaching, they had to yell, "Unclean, unclean," to tell you, "Stay away from me. I'm dirty, I'm diseased, you can't be near me, I will defile you, I will make you sick, stay away." No one had touched this man since the moment he became sick, whether it was a month, 4 months, a year, or a decade. No one has touched this man, and Jesus touches him. He cleanses him. He allows him to go home. This man was isolated, and Jesus touches him the first time in maybe a decade. This man is touched. He feels an embrace. He feels a warm caress for the first time in maybe years, and he can go home. And then the healing, you better believe that healing was attested to by some witnesses. You better believe some people saw that. He went home, he saw his friends, and he saw his family again. I can guarantee it. Second, we see this man is healed from an "I deserve it" mentality. He is healed from his belief that he must have done something to anger God in order to be a leper. First of all, the disease is described. You just have to understand the culture a little bit for this one. Jews believed that leprosy was a curse. We talked about that. So when this text says this man is a leper, any good Jew that read it would have gone, "Oh man, oh no, he deserved that." So the disease is described. Second, a request is made. Again, he says, "You can make me clean." Not "you can heal me," not "you can fix me," not "you can make my rash go away." You can make me clean. Because when someone was unclean, they were unacceptable to God. When someone was unclean, God wanted nothing to do with them. When somebody was unclean, that meant God had cursed them. And when he says, "Jesus, you can make me clean," he's not just saying I can go home. He's also saying, "Jesus, you can make it so that God wants me again." And the healing is described. Jesus doesn't say, "I heal you." He doesn't say, "Leprosy be gone." He says, "Be clean." Jesus, God in the flesh, is standing before him. And I imagine that he doesn't just touch his face. I imagine he wraps his arms around him and says, "Be clean." He says, "I am God and I accept you. I am God and I know you. I am God and I love you." And I think this healing was attested to by witnesses. Because he goes and sees a priest, right? God's representative on earth. So the priest can declare him clean. Last of all, this man was healed from hopelessness. The disease is described. He has some sickness, some skin disease, some rash or parasite or bacteria that cannot be healed. And he comes to Jesus and he says, it says that a request is made. The text tells us that a request is made. Because he says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." If you are willing. He doesn't doubt that Jesus can do it, but he wonders if he wants to. He wonders if he is willing. He wonders if Jesus loves him enough to heal him. And so he says, "God, if it fits in your plans, if you love me enough, if you have the desire, you are capable, you can make me clean." He makes a request. You can give me hope. Next, healing is described. Jesus looks at this man who really, this is his last-ditch effort. Maybe some rabbis had prayed for him before, from a safe distance, of course. Maybe some Pharisees went by after he finished screaming, "Unclean!" He said, "If you'll pray for me, maybe God will listen to you." And maybe those Pharisees just kept on walking. Maybe he had gotten down on his knees night after night and said, "God, I don't know what I did wrong, but please take this sickness away from me." And nothing had worked. And so finally he goes to Jesus, this man that he had just heard whispers about from the other lepers, from people walking a little bit too close and talking a little bit too loud on the road. And he says, "I think this guy might be able to heal me." And Jesus looks at him in all of his hopelessness and says, "Don't worry. I do love you enough. It is a part of my plan. I am willing." And then the healing is attested by witnesses. He returns to the city full of joy, and if you read just a couple sentences longer, then even though Jesus tells him not to tell anyone, he just can't keep it in, and word of Jesus spreads all throughout the region. Everyone hears about it. I tell you this story, not just to prove to you that some guy 2,000 years ago had some anxiety, not just to prove to you that Jesus helped him out, but I tell you this story because sometimes we feel like the leper. And this story tells us a secret. Luke 5 tells us that Jesus has a solution to your sickness. Luke 5 tells us that Jesus is the death of your disease. It says that Jesus is the answer to your anxiety. And why is that? Because he can heal the unhealable. Maybe in your life, anxiety comes from the fact that you're worried that you're not a good parent, that you're going to do something wrong, you're going to mess up your kids. So you know what? Go on a quest for healing. Describe your disease. Say, "God, I'm worried that I'll mess up raising my kids, or that I already did. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to make their lives harder than it has to be." Make a request. Say, "Lord, guide my hands as I attempt to raise my children." And I guarantee you, healing will be described. God will look at you, hold you in his arms, and he'll whisper somewhere deep in your soul, "I was a parent to you. And I'm a parent to your child too. I'll care for your son. I will keep your daughter safe. This isn't all on you." Maybe you're a little bit more like me though. And your anxiety comes from a fear that you'll fail, that you'll burn out at your job, that your education will crash and burn, your grades won't be high enough, your accomplishments won't be lofty enough. So describe your disease. Look up to God. Do it 100 times if you have to. Say, "God, I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm not good enough. I'm scared that I'm not going to accomplish anything. I'm scared that if I mess up, that you won't love me anymore. I'm scared that I will be a failure." Be honest. Describe your disease and then make a request. Say, "Lord, help me to find my value in you." And your healing will be described. God will look at you like he's had to look at me 100 times before, and he'll say, "You are more than your job. You are more prestigious than your degrees. You are bigger than your office. You're worth more than your paycheck. You are a child of God who was bought with a price. God himself became a baby, lived 30 years to die for you. You are worth more than you know. God will heal you." Maybe your anxiety comes from panic over things that you can't even control. You're looking at this reopening plan and you think that it's great, but you're just worried that it might go wrong, or you think it's a horrible plan and it'll never work, and you don't know what's going to happen to the economy. Well, know what? Describe your disease. Look to God and say, "God, I am panicked over things that I can't control. What if I get sick? What if my parents get sick? What if my grandparents get sick? What if something happens to my child? What if something happens to my job, to my income, to my savings? What do I do?" Then look at God and make a request. Say, "Lord, give me peace." And God will look at you and he will describe your healing. He will say, I am what you need. I am bigger than the current events. I am bigger than the government. I am bigger than sickness. I am bigger than death. If you do not believe me, look at the empty tomb. Study my word closely. and see that I am with you, and I will never leave. We are living in an age of anxiety. But Jesus can heal the unhealable. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the sermon, if you were moved by it, then please don't let this moment pass you by. Contact us. You can email us at info@bereanconnect.com. You can call the church offices. The number is on our website. And while you're at it, follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, like this video wherever you see it. It really helps us to get the message out there and to connect with more people. We can't wait to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today, and we can't wait to see you again. Bye. Memorial Day is an opportunity for us to remember our veterans, remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. We want to take this moment to remember all the veterans who have been a part of the Berean community, either currently or in the past. Thank you for your service, and we'll be remembering you and praying for you this Memorial Day.